Welcome to the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast. I'm Mike Waters. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by sports writer Adam Zagoria of Zagsblog and NJ.com. We talked about our experiences at the Peach Jam, Syracuse commits Donnie Freeman and Elijah Moore, Syracuse target Kiyan Anthony, and the changing world of college recruiting. Well, welcome back to another edition of the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast, and I'm happy to bring in a longtime friend of mine, one of the top guys in the business, especially when it comes to recruiting. You've read him in the New York Times, newjersey.com, the New York Star Ledger. So in a way, he's part of the advanced family with us at syracuse.com. Adam Zagoria. Adam, it's good to see you here because I just got to see you at Peach Jam down in South Carolina just a few days ago.
That's right, Mike. You got your first Peach Jam experience. I hope you had fun down there. It's everyone should go to Peach Jam at least once in their lives.
I agree. And if you do ever go to Peach Jam, you definitely want to go to Beanie's on the River for some great Southern seafood. I highly recommend it. I don't know if you made a stop there, Adam, but
I went to Nacho Mama's down on Broad Street. That's my spot.
I saw that place. I saw that.
You got to get the peaches and they had the spicy chicken sandwiches from Chick-fil-A's.
Nice. Okay. Very good. All right. Well, we'll put our restaurant recommendations aside and talk about a little bit about recruiting. It was really interesting to me this past weekend. I got a chance to see a couple of kids that have already committed to Syracuse in the class of 2024. One of them was at Peach Jam. That was Donnie Freeman or Donovan Freeman. He's like a 6'8", 6'9" forward out of the Washington, D.C. area. I got to see him myself, so I might bounce a couple thoughts off of you, Adam. But first of all, I just want to get your opinion. What kind of player is Syracuse getting in Donovan Freeman?
Well, first of all, Mike, they're getting a winner, right? I mean, you talk to all these coaches. I'm sure you talk to Coach Autry. These guys want DNA of people who have been in big games, know how to win, know how to compete. And you're getting somebody from the DC area, plays for Takeover. Let's just remind everyone this was Takeover's third Peach Jam championship since 2010. That tied MoKan Elite for the most. They've been in five finals since 2010. So Takeover is as good a Nike EYBL program as there is. He was playing alongside, Darren Harris, who's going to Duke, had 28, I think, in the final. There are guys on that team being, going to Rhode Island, being recruited by, UConn, Providence, all the big schools. So, he's a champion. He's a Peach Jam champion. So that's gonna, if you're a coach, you want that kind of DNA in your program. He had that one dunk. I think you and I were there for. Maybe that was in the final. He had the transition dunk that kind of made the highlights, and Syracuse fans will love that. Long, athletic guy, can shoot it a little bit, seems like, for the mid-range, can get out in transition, can guard multiple positions, defend, alter some shots in the post. So I think he'd be a perfect guy for the zone, and I guess we'll see do we know how much Red is going to use the zone?
I think he might have it in his arsenal, but from what we're hearing, I think he wants to play more man-to-man.
Yeah.
And I watched Donnie Freeman, watched all the Syracuse recruits with that in mind, like not just zone anymore. But, Donnie Freeman, he's got the athletic ability to step out and stay in front of, obviously, power forwards, fours, but also I could see him, switching on the perimeter and being able to stay with a 3 guy, maybe even a 2 for a short stint until you back up. And then, I think you and I were at the game when they played MoKan Elite. And when Patrick Ngamba went out of the game, Donnie Freeman switched to the 5 and was guarding the 7'2" kid, John Bull.
Yeah.
I know John Bull doesn't weigh more than 200 pounds, but he's still 7'2".
Yeah, I think he's, in today's modern parlance, he's a multi-positional guy. He's positionless. So everything you're saying, he can guard multiple positions. He can play multiple positions. So that's the kind of template that coaches want nowadays.
The other thing I want to ask you about regarding Donnie Freeman, he committed to Syracuse after the coaching change. Jim Boeheim had retired. he commits when Red Autry's the head coach. Brendan Strawn's been hired onto the staff, joining Alan Griffin and Jerry McNamara. Kind of interesting to get a commitment from a kid like that with the new staff, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a chance to talk to him about that. Maybe you did. It'd be interesting to see his take on, our kids. Is Red Autry, is younger. He's a little hipper than, we all love Jim Boeheim, but he was, of a certain generation, and Red's obviously a lot younger, and comes from a different background. Played, has known a lot of the kids for a long time. So it'll be interesting to see if the kids make any comments specifically about, their relationship with Red and why they chose him.
Yeah, I think
overall Red is just such a personable, likable guy. Everyone likes him in the industry, that he's going to do well in recruiting. And obviously he's going to have to win games on the court.
The other kid that has committed to Syracuse in the 2024 class is a guy from your New York City area there, Elijah Moore, from Cardinal Hayes High School in the Bronx. I'm sure you've seen Elijah play a lot. I got to see him play just once this past weekend. What do you think of Elijah?
Yeah, I mean, he's a great shooter. I was actually just texting with his high school coach this morning. He said he and Ian Jackson, who's committed to North Carolina, are both about 500 points behind Jamal Mashburn's all-time school record at Cardinal Hayes, and he called him the best shooter we've ever had. So that's some pretty high praise. And obviously, when you're talking about potentially breaking a record set by Jamal Mashburn, you're into some heady company there. But
yeah,
all coaches want shooters and guys who can space the floor and shoot it, and that's certainly what Elijah Moore does.
Yeah, and it would be one thing if you had one kid approaching a 20-something-year-old record, but to have two kids in the same class, that's a lot of points being scored by a high school team.
Yeah, and you got, two kids going to the ACC, obviously, and Ian, he was committed to North Carolina. There's a lot of talk that he may end up flipping, go to St. John's and play for Rick Pitino, but, that hasn't happened yet. But it's good, it's good for New York City basketball, which has been sort of perceived as down, quote unquote, for a while now, to have guys like Elijah and Boogie Fland at Stepanak and Ian Jackson, playing at the highest levels of high school and grassroots basketball, kind of putting New York City back on the map a little bit.
Elijah Moore can definitely shoot. In his last 2 games up at the Adidas event in Rock Hill, South Carolina, he made 7 threes in one game and 9 in the other. I mean, 9 threes in 32 minutes.
Yeah. That's Joe Girard-esque.
It's a lot of 3. And yeah, he can really shoot the ball. What I like is he's not just a standstill 3-point shooter. He's got nice lift. It's a jump shot from 3-point range.
Yeah. No, he's got good form, and obviously he's been coached up well by Joe and the guys at Cardinal Hayes. And again, you could never have enough shooting. I mean, that's what wins games. And then, you obviously want guards who can penetrate and draw the defenders and then kick it out to guys like Elijah, who can, bang home a 3. So it'll be fun. Anytime Syracuse has guys from New York City or the New York area, I think that, you cover the team. I would think that adds a little juice around the team, right?
I think it definitely does. It makes the non-conference trips to the Garden, because I know Syracuse still tries to play games at either Madison Square Garden or at the Barclays, like they did last season. They played 2 games at the Barclays. It makes those trips a little bit more fun. If there's a kid or 2 on the team from the New York City area, and they'll draw a cheering section, and just the New York City alumni. They have somebody to get behind. Maybe Cardinal Hayes's attendance is probably going to go up this coming season with all the Syracuse fans wanting to see Elijah Moore.
Yeah. I'll tell you, if we get a, St. John's, if Rick Pitino gets St. John's going and we somehow get a Syracuse St. John's non-conference matchup at the Garden, that would really be fun, wouldn't it?
That would be awesome. We love those games. Well, another kid, so Elijah Moore and Donnie Freeman are the 2 guys that have committed to Syracuse. I I think that gave the Syracuse coaches a chance to be very selective in who else they looked at in the 24 class at Peach Jam. But I watched the coach. I was trailing them around. They were watching a lot of kids that were 25 class, 26 class. I even caught them one time watching New Heights, an AAU team out of the New York City area. They were watching 8th graders.
Yeah, wow.
That's a huge advantage, isn't it, to be able to like make yourself seen to younger kids in an event like that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, all these schools like Syracuse, everybody, they have to plan, a couple of years in advance now. And, I'm sure they have big boards in their recruiting in their offices at Syracuse about all their targets in 25, 26. I mean, we should just mention here briefly, Mike, that the 3 biggest stars, the big 3 that I wrote about today on Zagsblog at the Peach Jam, were all class 25 and 26 kids. Cam Boozer is the son of Carlos Boozer. Cooper Flagg, those guys both played in the 16s, and AJ DeBonsa from Expressions, who's a Massachusetts kid. So those are kids in the classes of 25 and 26, who are the 3 most talked about best players at the camp. And then after that, Dylan Harper, probably in the class of 2024, was the most, best, most hyped senior. So there's a lot of talent in these younger classes. Obviously, I'm not sure Syracuse is going to get Cooper Flagg or Cam Boozer, but to get to your point, they are targeting and recruiting those classes. But that's also been made complicated by the transfer portal because, you talk to any of these coaches and they'll tell you 5-10 years ago, you could plan out your roster. Hey, we're going to lose our point guard to graduation after this year. We got to go recruit a point guard. Right. Now you got kids entering the portal in June. I mean, go ask Rutgers. Go talk to Steve Peichel. He just lost 2 kids, Cam Spencer and Paul Mulcahy, to UConn and Washington, respectively, who entered the portal in June. And now, you got to replace those guys. So while Syracuse and these other schools obviously have to recruit and know who the class of 25, 26 guys are, at any moment their roster could be thrown into disarray when 2, 3, 4, 5 kids transfer after the year, or a couple kids transfer in June, and then you got to go. A high school kid isn't going to help you there. You need to go. You need to go get a transfer, and that's kind of the world we're in now, where coaches have the option of getting a 22, 23. Javon Quinterly is going to be 25 next year playing college basketball, and these guys are grown men as opposed to recruiting high school kids who are 18 or 19. So I think, Adam Finkelstein, our friend from 247, he made a good point on one of the broadcasts that maybe the ideal model now is kind of what Alabama did last year with a one and done star like a Brandon Miller, maybe 2 of those guys, surrounded by veterans and older players and transfers. So I think maybe it'll be interesting to see if more schools kind of go with that model.
Yeah, and I was actually going to get to your Zags blog of this morning when you talked about Cooper Flagg and Cam Boozer and AJ DeBance's kids and all the young ones, and they really were the talk of Peach Jam. It wasn't the kids that were going to be seniors in the fall.
Yeah.
So I was going to get to that, but since you did bring it up, another friend of ours, Matt Norlander, wrote a piece talking to several coaches about the whole transfer portal and how that's going to affect roster management. And to your point, like maybe you don't bring in as many high school kids as you used to because you're only going to lose them probably because you can't keep everybody happy. It's impossible. They're going to transfer, and you want to be old at some point. So you want to have spots to bring in transfers. It probably also depends on what level we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, like John Calipari and John Shire at Duke and Kentucky, respectively, they might manage their rosters a certain way, but a guy at, I don't know, St. Bonaventure, Rutgers, Manhattan, all these other, different levels are going to have to work it very differently.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for a long time, the model, for the last decade was kind of like Calipari started the one and done thing. Could you win an NCAA championship relying mostly on one and dones? And, it was really only twice that it happened. Kentucky in 2012 with Anthony Davis and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and then Duke 2015 with Jahlil Okafor and Justice Winslow and Tyus Jones. And now you see Cal kind of going, he's got the #1 recruiting class in the country this year, but he's also brought in some key transfers like Trey Mitchell from West Virginia. Duke every year now brings in a couple transfers or grad transfers. So you're right. Those schools are going to continue to be in the mix for the Cooper Flags and AJ DeBonces of the world while bringing in some transfers. And these other, lower mid-level schools they're going to, also work hard in the portal to fill needs. And then I think plug it here and there with a high school kid that they think they can develop and will stay with the program for a couple of years. Because another part of that is you're a low major or mid major, like a Hofstra or whatever. You get a kid, you develop him for 2-3 years. He becomes really good. Tyson Walker was at Northeastern. He's a New York City kid. He transferred to Michigan State after a couple of years. So it's almost like the low mid level schools are, like the minor leagues or the training ground for the high majors to just pluck off and take their kids after a couple of years.
Yeah, I do feel bad for coaches that in the Metro Atlantic or Northeast Conference, because you have to worry about players being poached. Another thing that's going to change the recruiting landscape is NIL.
Yeah,
and it's not like what a lot of fans think, that schools like Kansas, Kentucky, North Carolina with big NIL coffers are going to get the best high school recruits, because they always did anyway, or they're going to steal other players from other schools, because that happens anyway. We were talking about the transfer portal. Kids just want to go to a higher level and win. Where I've heard a few coaches last weekend at Peach Jam, they're only taking a couple, 2 or 3 high school kids because that's all the NIL budget they have.
Yeah, that's
they
funny.
have to save NIL money as well for transfers, because that's where the real money comes in. Like when a transfer is going from one college to another, he has a better idea of what his worth is. So I'm like, oh my God, it's not just roster management. It's almost like a salary cap management or something.
Yeah. Well, it's those are great points. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, you saw like Villanova hired Baker Dunleavy to come in and essentially be their NIL guy. He's like a capologist in the NFL. And now, I think St. John's is going to do something similar. Duke had, a year or two ago hired somebody. So you're going to have like a capologist or a president of basketball operations to manage NIL and manage your money, because that, first of all, the coaches are technically not supposed to be involved in that, but it's also just too much. A head coach already has to deal with all his current players and any kind of knucklehead nonsense that goes on, and coaching and, recruiting, but, to throw an NIL on top of that is a little too much. And then you mentioned the money. Yeah. A guy like Hunter Dickinson, right? Reportedly, I don't know what he got, but there were reports he was getting offered $2 million from, by Kansas and Maryland. He ended up at Kansas. So this is like, serious money for a college kid before he goes off into the real world. And anybody out there who begrudges these kids getting that money, that's ridiculous, I think.
Yeah, I don't begrudge them at all. If the money's there, I'd rather, I'd like to see it go to a kid. They're the ones on the court earning it, right?
Yeah.
Somebody thinks they have value.
But you are going to have the haves and the have-nots. I mean, I know you covered the Big East for a long time, and now I cover the Big East, and some of these schools like Seton Hall I cover, and they don't have, their NIL situation is not ideal. UConn's got a pretty good situation. Rick Pitino at St. John's has sort of made his own NIL situation because he's got a lot of friends in the business who have money, boosters. But a guy like a Shaheen Holloway at Seton Hall, it's harder to get players. He still needs 2 players to fill his roster out now in mid-July. So the sort of downside of it is it could create a haves and have-nots, which we've always had in college basketball, let's face it. Mm-hmm. But it's more going to be about who's got the NIL money and the boosters.
Before I get, I love talking about the big topics and the big subjects, but I got to bring it back down to just talk about a player again, a recruit, before we get out of here. And that's Cayenne Anthony, the son of Syracuse legend Carmelo Anthony. He's playing basketball, there. I mean, I know he was at Christ the King last year for about half the year, but he's transferred to Long Island Lutheran. You've seen him play. What are your thoughts on Cayenne?
Yeah, I think he's a solid player. He's obviously being recruited by some good schools, and they're making him available now, which is like, we could never talk to Bronny James, like never talked, but Cayenne, you can actually now like text and get in touch with Cayenne. He's doing stories. I guess in his last text, he told me he heard from Michigan, Kentucky, UConn, Arkansas. Obviously he's got the Syracuse offer, Providence, Florida State. So, there's just some pretty serious schools that obviously all have legitimate interest in him. I do think it's kind of cool for, Carmelo was at Peach Jam and LeBron was there. So they're there really, Cayenne wasn't playing, but these guys are there supporting their sons, and they want them to live their own journeys and take their own path. And, let's face it, these guys are never going to be their dads, just like Michael Jordan's kids weren't. Bronny James, whatever he becomes, he's not going to be LeBron, but they have their own, path to follow.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're talking about in terms of Cayenne being so available. I thought it was going to be a hard get at Peach Jam. But I wound up with the easiest one-on-one was with Cayenne. He was totally into it. We sat him down. We did it on a video. It ran with a story that was on syracuse.com on Tuesday morning. So we put together this great video by our videographer, Scott Tremble, who was down there with me. And the kid's just amazing. He's great. He talks. You can ask him anything. Ask him about his dad's influence, what it's like playing in his dad's shadow. The whole legacy thing. And he's just, I guess he's 16. He's so polished.
What was the best thing you learned from that?
Let me see. Best thing I learned. He said he got his outgoing nature and a sense of humor from his mom. And he got his nature is to keep his circle close. He goes, I'm friendly with a lot of people, but I have just a certain set of close friends. And that's kind of like his dad. But I wanted to ask him about his mom because we always associate him with dad. He's Carmelo Anthony's kid and everything. And I'm like, well, let's ask him about his mom and his traits from his parents. And his eyes kind of lit up. I think I had asked him something maybe he hadn't heard from anybody before. So that was kind of fun. But on a basketball and recruiting standpoint, he did say he's not worried about coming to Syracuse and being in his father's footsteps or having that shadow. It's not something that he's going to shy away from. However, he's also not a lock, and he knows he's got to pick the school that he's most comfortable going, or maybe has playing time or whatever else it is. So basically, he was non-committal on the recruiting front.
Yeah, I mean, look, Adrian Autry has a son who's, he's not at that level, but he didn't go to Syracuse, right?
Right. Trey Autry's going to be a freshman at George Washington in the fall.
Yeah. So, and I think Fran McCaffrey told me one of his sons, I think he said the brothers told the younger son not to go to Iowa and to go somewhere else. So, that happens. But, you got the Boozer twins. Obviously, there's a sort of expectation that they're going to end up at Duke. But John Calipari and Hubert Davis were both there, recruiting them. They're really good players. And I think there's a sense that Kentucky has a legitimate chance with them. Look, these kids want to be recruited, right? You want to be wanted. You want schools to offer you and take you on visits and be wanted and have choices. If you're Cayenne Anthony, you don't want people thinking, you're going to Syracuse and no one else should contact you. If you're the Boozers, same thing with Duke. Cooper Flagg, people think he's going to end up in Duke, but Dan Hurley and UConn are out there recruiting him. So, they want to go through the process. They want to be courted, but in the end, it may come down to just, the relationships, right? Like Syracuse obviously has deep relationships with Cayenne and the family. The Boozers obviously have deep relationships at Duke. So, we'll see. It'll be interesting if any of these kids don't go to the school their father went to.
It will be interesting, fun to follow. Adam, listen, this has been a great and fun conversation for me. I'm glad you were able to join us. For folks out there, this was Adam Zagoria. You can read him stuff at zagsblog.com. Sometimes he's at our sister paper, New Star Ledger at nj.com. And if he's not writing, he's out on the ultimate Frisbee field. It looks like it's a beautiful day for Frisbee, Adam. And I was wondering if maybe you wanted to toss a disc around, right?
Oh, look at that. Look at that. Here, I'll get mine right here. I got mine right here. I actually played a summer league game last night, and our team won. My calves are hurting a little bit, but they weren't that bad. And then I'm playing an over 50 nationals next week in Colorado.
For the folks that don't know, the whole Frisbee bit here, Adam is a long time and outstanding ultimate Frisbee player, going all the way back to your college days, right?
So I went to college nationals back in the 80s. So that just shows how old I am.
And pretty damn good too. You take care of those calves.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Great to talk to you.
All right, dude. See ya.
Bye-bye.